Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another in the podcast series, Leadership Perspective from the Field. And today I'd like to introduce Björn Schigt. I'd like Bjorn to just say a few words about his background. Bjorn, welcome.
Yeah, good to see you again, Tony. I worked for 17 years in the corporate world in operational, executive and consulting roles worldwide. Then I quit my job and started a startup. That didn't really work out. Didn't fly, but I learned a lot during 2 years. And then at one point, I realized that a lot of former colleagues of mine approached me and asked me, what can I do with my team? What can I do with my boss? What can I do with my career, for instance? And I thought this is quite interesting. And then I decided to find out how you can become a coach and a leadership coach. And somebody close to me from an academic institution said, either you do INSEAD, or you do, I should say, Paris and University of Oxford, a master in coaching consulting for change, or you have to follow courses, but this is probably the best. And I signed up for the latter, graduated in 2020, early 2020, and I've been coaching since 3-4 years, and usually it's executives and always in leadership.
Excellent. One of the things actually I'm curious about is your research into psychological safety, and particularly in your research you study CEOs. I wondered if that's had an influence on how you would describe leadership.
I think what I found important in my thesis was to go back, like the context of leadership, why leaders are like this. And even though my tutor was not really supporting it, I really wanted to look into, the past. And I started in 1880, where people, the only thing they had to do was just push a button on a machine, and what they would get was food and housing. It was the only thing they cared about. So you would have leaders or managers or whatever you want to call it, who just told people what to do. And now, when we are here in this era where we're reaching the upper side of the Maslow pyramid, people need more. They need self-fulfillment. They need to, you can work anywhere if you are a knowledge worker like us, and that gives much more power towards the workforce. And therefore, I think leaders have to. Fortunately, most of them have moved away already from command and control towards an empathic style of leadership. Mm-hmm. And so it hasn't changed. I think it's more like, and probably we'll discuss it later, it's like part of a repertoire, empathic leadership, to create psychological safety in a team, which is one of the drivers of performance that has become much more important than in the past.
Okay, thank you. The first question is around where you personally have had to demonstrate leadership. And there may be a situation early in your career or later where it was a major milestone experience for you, something that's remained with you as significant. Can you think of such a situation?
Yeah, there are many occasions, actually. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the way I see it might not be the same as people that were, part of the team might have seen it. But I think if you would measure leadership in terms of engagement and commitment of people, and productivity and ownership of the team, I think actually in the company that we used to work for, there was a period where I worked for the region Eastern Europe in commercial excellence. And there I must say that I'm extremely proud of the team, that we managed with, I think in total were like 100 people, spread over 10 countries, to achieve so many, results and projects, which were probably the company wasn't even ready for it, in terms of analytics, big data, and probably it was also a little bit too much. And, but I must say that I think this is how it shaped me in terms of leadership, that I felt I was part of it. And sometimes, as I said before, you have a repertoire between sometimes you have to be tough, sometimes you have to be very empathic, and sometimes you have to be coaching. And I still have contact with a lot of people from this period. And I think there was a good achievement, I think, as a team. And this is, I think, what leadership is about.
And how long were you associated with that team then?
It was 1.5 years, and then I got promoted to do it for the whole of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I think, in total 2.5 years. And with the whole of Europe, it got a little bit, I think, bigger and more complex. And because then you have also different cultures, different influences, different stakeholders, and also, in terms of market maturity as well. Mm-hmm. So 2.5 years in total.
So in the first period before you got promoted, was it fairly straightforward, or was it challenging to actually get that team working how you wanted it to work?
I think I like to lead, not like to tell people what to do, but I like to to have a vision and to put this into practice and find out what are the right people for it to do it. Who are the people that have the right skills or talents or ambitions or aspirations, and put them together. And I think we managed. One of the things that I also learned is that you don't have to have like a straight line towards a direct report. It can also be a dotted line, mm-hmm. as long as you can empower these people. And I think this is what we did. We called them champions. So we had like a lot of champions for certain projects in per country. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot about empowerment and a lot about giving them the tools to make their life easier. And I think that's also one of the responsibilities of a leader, to make sure that you facilitate the work of your teams. And I think that worked well. But again, that's my view. I don't know, maybe other people see it differently, but that's the impression that I had for myself.
And then after the promotion and you took on a broader responsibility, the challenges were a bit more difficult, were they?
Yeah, politics. The higher you come, the more politics, the less work. And that was, and I've always been the youngest, and I felt that I always had to prove myself towards my peers who were 10, 15 years older. And so that was a little bit more challenging, I think, than when you're just below the radar, but then you just move up to the radar, and then you can get into a different territory.
Similar question, but more where you have observed someone else demonstrating significant leadership that created a milestone event or a breakthrough. Can you think of such an example?
Yeah, I was one of my favorite bosses, actually. I was his assistant. He was part of the exco in the company that I worked for. And I worked for him before the financial crisis, mainly on expansion. So this was 2008, 2009, 2010, that period. Mm-hmm. And before the financial crisis was all about expansion. And then I was assigned to lead a project about restructuring, cost cutting, downsizing, becoming more efficient with what we had, like cutting out production lines, mothballing. And that also had an impact on the workforce and also impact on responsibilities. And I remember, and that's more, maybe I romanticize it a little bit right now, but the feeling that I got is that people that were reporting to him, and also management teams that were reporting to him, they had to come to Zurich, and then they had a meeting with him. And then after the meeting, they came out and they passed my office, and I asked them, how was the meeting? And they sort of smiled and said, like, I got fired, or, there's a new position for me, but it was very human. The conversation was very human. And it's not, nice news, but I feel very comfortable with it. And we have a good boss.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you think he had a gentle way of persuading people?
I think it was also being authentic, authenticity, and also understanding that, I think the human side of it is very important, that you know what the consequences are when you fire somebody or when you change the responsibility. And it might be families, it might be finance, of course, but it might also be relocation. It might be, that people have dreams that they cannot realize. And I think he was in particular quite human about this, and understanding, where people come from. And that's what I very much admired. And compared to other let's say, top executives who were, I think, much more remote, much more distant, and which is a style too, which is fine too. But his style very much appealed to me.
What would you say is going to be required of leaders going forward?
I'm humble, let's put it like this, but I have a few. And the few is that I think more and more based on the experience that I have made myself from I wouldn't say from research or science, but more, what you can read about the evolution of leadership. I think, and also what you see in the context of the world that we live in, I think what is very important is authenticity. It's very important that you really are your authentic self, especially because crises are coming up so fast and leave, and everybody can leave his or her job tomorrow. And in the end, we're all human beings. So I think it's important to be authentic, to be very close to yourself, that when things go wrong, that the team actually knows there's a human being. It's not my boss, but it's actually somebody who's really included into the management team. The second part is actually, it's more like the top, it's that you have to offer a perspective to your team or to anyone, because if you don't have any perspective, there's no motivation. And I think that's very important to realize as a leader as well. And the third part is where you set the boundaries and discipline. It doesn't have to be, like super tight boundaries. It can be much wider as long as you set some kind of rules of engagement, which you can define together with your team. And the fourth part is the repertoire that you have as a leader. And that could be being empathic. Maybe sometimes even command and control if there's a huge crisis situation. But you actually have like a repertoire that is true to yourself and to your authentic self. And it also is in line with what the company finds important and what the team finds important in terms of what is your value system, what are your beliefs, what is your attitude, but also your personality, because that's from my research as well, is that it's not possible for everybody to be an empathic leader. And that has very much to do with personality as well.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you is this notion of psychological safety, an environment where people feel that they can speak up and be heard to express themselves without the fear of recrimination or backstabbing or whatever.
Yeah.
And in some organizations that can be quite challenging to create that environment. I was wondering, how does a leader create that safety and build that confidence for people to feel that they can speak up without being reprimanded or whatever?
Yes, I think a big part is in your personality. And so one of them, I'm certified for Hogan, and I rebuilt Hogan into my own assessment. And because what I missed it from my thesis was that, like if you look at certain personality traits, agreeableness and consensuousness, if you talk about the big five, they're very important for empathic leadership, which you actually need for psychological safety. And so, which actually means that even if you're not very strong and have, strong traits of agreeableness and consensuousness, you can still be aware of the triggers. You can still be aware of the fact, like what actually happens. And then, related to Hogan, what happens when I'm, under normal circumstances? What happens when I'm, under pressure, and how do I react? I think my assessment and Hogan really could contribute to give people an insight into their how they are perceived, what the triggers are and how they react. I think that's one thing. The other things could be coaching, perhaps. If you have somebody who can actually give, really hold a mirror for you and say, listen, is it really necessary to behave like this? Why did you behave like this? And what is the impact of changing your behavior? And how would it actually contribute to certain goals? And I think there also what came out of my my thesis, what is important in terms of creating a team climate where people feel safe. It's also about performance. And for performance, you need to have a culture which about like voice behavior, speak up. Then the next thing is like to create new ideas, that people actually can create together ideas. Mm-hmm. If you have the feeling that you are constantly alone as a leader because you're too dominant, I mean, you can do this 3 times and then people say like, you know what, Tony, you're so dominant, you think you know everything, I'm not going to work with you, because I'm going to take responsibility for anything. I think that's then the second step. And then it's about commitment and engagement. And I think if you start feeling that where you have to be honest to yourself when team members are not anymore engaged or committed, it's not because of them. Sometimes it could also be because of you or the climate that you create. And then a fourth step would be ownership and responsibility. And I think same thing. If the leader realizes that there's no ownership and no responsibility, then find out, why this is actually happening. And the fifth is performance in the end, but the very important part is not to have performance alone, but also to have a job and life satisfaction. Mm-hmm. So that's the sixth part. And I think this is something you can measure with the turnaround of employees in your team. Mm-hmm. So I think there are a lot of triggers, a lot of signals that can help the leader to map basically what is going on. To be suddenly a nice guy when you're not really a nice guy, or like a very, let's say, soft guy or a soft woman when you're a tough woman. Then you go back to authenticity. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't fake it until you make it. I wouldn't do this.
Björn Schigt, thank you very much.